Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. At the 22nd Shangri-La Dialogue held in Singapore, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin went all out to hype up the so-called China threat in order to pressure allied countries to increase their military spending. However, at this Shangri-La Dialogue, the defense ministers of ASEAN countries emphasized the concept of strategic autonomy. Even officials from the current Philippine government, which is considered the most anti-China, have publicly stated that they do not lack the banner of strategic autonomy. When attending the meeting, Philippine Defense Secretary Teodoro said that although the Philippines is a treaty ally of the United States, it does not lack the banner of strategic autonomy. On one hand, he is still hyping up and exaggerating the so-called threat of China seeking to become a superpower. But on the other hand, he also pointed out that ASEAN should not overemphasize this reality, as doing so would unfairly portray the legitimate actions of small countries as being carried out at the behest of major powers, making it seem as if these small countries are merely pawns without their own strategic autonomy. On June 1st, the South China Morning Post quoted an analyst as saying that the China threat theory hyped up by Kierkegaard is unlikely to gain unanimous support from all 10 ASEAN countries, because ASEAN is still facing the threat of high tariffs from Trump and economic uncertainty, and is seeking to deepen cooperation with trading partners outside of the major powers. In the long run, it will be difficult for Southeast Asian countries to maintain a hedging strategy between the two major powers, China and the US. ASEAN will reduce its reliance on the United States and rely more on like-minded partners such as the European Union and the Gulf Cooperation Council. At this Shangri-La Dialogue, Thailand's Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, Putapong Bechayachai, said that although there are differences between our superpower friends, we are still friends with everyone. Here, we refers to Thailand and ASEAN. ASEAN member states have long emphasized a policy of non-alignment with superpowers. However, as China's influence in the economic and military spheres continues to grow, the United States has increased its strategic focus on this region, which has created complex balancing challenges for ASEAN. Roman Jacob, a researcher with the Southeast Asia program at the Australian think tank Lowy Institute, said that in the face of U.S. tariff threats, ASEAN member states are not more likely to increase defense spending in the short term because of economic uncertainty. He believes that although the South China Sea issue still exists, China's rise has brought economic benefits to Southeast Asia. In recent years, relations between China and the Philippines have experienced setbacks due to the South China Sea issue, and this issue has also become an unavoidable topic at a recent Shangri-La Dialogue. In response, Philippine Defense Secretary Teodoro claimed that there is a lack of trust between the Philippines and China, and in a critical tone, he stated that for dialogue to be effective, it must be combined with trust. He added that for China to be an effective negotiating partner in resolving disputes, it needs to do a lot of work to build trust. In response to Teodoro's remarks at the forum, which smeared China over the South China Sea issue, President Meng Xianqing of the National Defense University delegation stated that the Philippine Defense Secretary's comments were groundless attacks. He accused China of ignoring the facts, misleading the public, inciting confrontation, sowing discord, and turning black into white, which runs counter to the overall trend of peace and stability in the region. The vast majority of countries refuse to take sides, insisting on independence and autonomy, and their shared desire for peace, development, exchange, and cooperation is completely at odds with such actions. China firmly opposes this, and the statements from the Philippines are also unacceptable. Leaders from some other ASEAN countries also emphasized their concerns about major power competition in the region. For example, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar stated that history shows when major powers try to divide the world into exclusive spheres of influence, smaller countries often have no way to make their voices heard. He said that while we welcome the strong and lasting presence of the United States in this region to promote peace, we also value our vibrant and steadfast relationship with China, as well as our strong partnerships in Asia, Europe, and the Global South. Jacob from the Lowy Institute for International Policy also believes that it's very difficult for Southeast Asian countries to maintain a hedging strategy between the two major powers, China and the US. In the long run, ASEAN will reduce its reliance on the United States and depend more on like-minded partners such as the European Union and the Gulf Cooperation Council. He said, "What worries me is that in the long run, America's influence in this region will weaken, because Southeast Asian countries have differences with the U.S. on economic issues as well as militarization and governance." Of course, his analysis is from the perspective of the United States. In fact, shortly before the Shangri-La Dialogue, the first ASEAN-China GCC summit was held in Kuala Lumpur on the afternoon of May 27 local time. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar highlighted in his opening speech that this is the first time the three parties have officially come together, marking a new stage in regional cooperation and representing an important milestone. Analysts have pointed out that U.S. protectionism is reshaping global trade relations, accelerating China's pivot towards Southeast Asia, and prompting ASEAN to double its efforts in seeking other partners. A former Malaysian diplomat believes that this summit reflects a broader adjustment in the global landscape, indicating that the U.S.'s dominance in capital flows and institutional influence is gradually weakening, while China's trade influence continues to expand. The GCC is also establishing lasting economic ties in Asia. Current ASEAN leaders or officials publicly emphasize not offending either China or the U.S., but U.S. policy swings back and forth, always puts America first, and demands that ASEAN increase military spending. In reality, this is just forcing ASEAN to buy more American weapons to help fill the gap in U.S. debt. Faced with such a domineering America, it's not really a reliable partner. Some retired ASEAN leaders are even more straightforward in their views on China and the U.S. Former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir also talked about the game between China and the United States when he attended the annual Forum on the Future of Asia hosted by Nikkei Shimbun in Tokyo on May 30th. He believes that China will not be easily defeated by the U.S., and it seems that China will even surpass the U.S. He thinks that China will not be easily defeated by the U.S., and it looks like China will become the world's #1 power. In his speech, he pointed out that given the increasingly conservative policy direction of the U.S., America will not be able to stop China's momentum of development. He criticized Trump's tariff policies for isolating the U.S., and even predicted that the U.S. would be forced to lift the tariffs within 3 months. He also criticized the U.S. for allowing senior officials to visit Taiwan, stirring up tensions in the Taiwan Strait in order to profit from arms sales to Taiwan. In Mahathir's view, China is destined to become the world's most outstanding country. Given the increasingly conservative and inward-looking nature of the U.S., America will not be able to stop China's rise. He bluntly stated that although U.S. President Trump is unhappy about China possibly challenging the U.S., China has existed for much longer than the U.S. and is one of the few ancient civilizations that have continued to this day. Mahathir also emphasized that he believes China will not be easily defeated by the U.S., and that America will not be able to regain its former glory and become #1 in the world again. It looks like China will become the world's leading power. Mahathir also said that by imposing so-called reciprocal tariffs, Trump treats the whole world as an enemy, which has led to America's isolation. He said that since the U.S. also relies on imported chips and other products, the tariffs will hurt America much more than other countries and will inevitably push up the cost of living in the U.S. He predicts that Trump will have to cancel these tariffs within 3 months. Mahathir also expressed concern about the continued dominance of the U.S. dollar in the global financial system. He said this gives the U.S. too much power to impose sanctions on other countries because they control trade settlements. He suggested that the world should not continue to use the U.S. dollar as the standard, but should switch to a new type of international currency focused on trade purposes, and this currency should be backed by gold. This is not the first time Mahathir has advocated for a gold-backed trade currency. As early as 2019, he proposed the idea of creating a common currency that would not circulate locally and would be used exclusively for trade settlements. According to a report by Nikkei Asia, Mahathir has been active in politics for nearly 80 years, championing the rights of developing countries and promoting greater cooperation within Asia. At 99 years old, Mahathir is Malaysia's longest-serving leader and is still actively participating in various political events. In recent years, he has frequently spoken about issues related to China. He once said that Western countries hope to stir up confrontation between nations, which stands in stark contrast to China's efforts to encourage peace and dialogue. He believes that war is not the way to solve problems, all parties should sit down and communicate, rather than escalating tensions by cutting off diplomatic relations or provoking each other. Mahathir has lived through World War II and the Cold War and has witnessed the rise and fall of great powers. In his analysis, China will become the world's #1 power, and it is only natural given its wisdom.